host, Cameron Blackwood. Today's guest is Howard Panton, who, as well as being my former boss, is currently the lead front-end engineer at M2A Media, working on a number of really exciting projects. Howard joins us today to discuss a variety of topics, primarily how he got into the industry from an interesting background in publishing originally. Howard also joins us to discuss mentoring, how he would go over things again, and what he would do if he was trying to learn to code in 2021. It's a fantastic episode, and I think you'll get a lot of insight from it. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to both me and Howard. And also as well, please join our Discord. The link's in the description. Today's episode of The Coder Career is brought to you by the Zero to Mastery Academy. Zero to Mastery hosts a number of great courses, whether you're trying to get your first job in tech or you're a tech lead trying to level up some of your skills. If you're still learning to code, I really recommend their original Zero to Mastery web developer course. If you've already learned and you're working already, I'm currently undertaking a junior to senior one and it's fantastic. They also as well have a new Next.js course, which I'm keen on checking out. It's great value at $23 a month, and you can get 10% off by following my link in the description and using my code FRIENDS10. Anyway, on with the show. Hi Howard, thanks so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
Thanks, Cam. Thanks for inviting me to your podcast. My name's Howard. I'm a senior or lead front-end developer at M2A Media.
Cool. And in terms of in terms of your sort of day-to-day life, are you mainly doing JavaScript and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I tend to work using JavaScript in my day-to-day life using the Angular framework. I also do UX design using Figma, and I'll also manage two other developers at M2A.
Very nice. You're a man of many hats in that respect then. It sounds very good. And my former boss as well, just something we should mention early on. So you already taught me a lot in terms of learning how to code. So I'm sure you'll impart some great knowledge for the listeners of the pod as well. So the way we like to usually start things on the podcast is go through some quick fire questions, if that sounds good. So the audience can get to know you a bit better. So I have the first question here. What was your first ever computer?
Wow. How far do you want me to go back?
As far as it goes.
My first computer for work wise, or first computer in terms of just generally getting my hand on a computer, would be, so my first one is a Sinclair ZX81. I'm not sure if your listeners will even remember or recall what that looked like. It was very basic computer. You connect it to your TV. You could do basic programming language on it, which is like very simple scripts. So that's our first one growing up. My first computer, in terms of like my first purchase of a personal computer, this would be going back to probably 95 and 96. It was an Apple Quadra 650. I'm not sure people remember the first Apple computers, the kind of like beige boxes, quite a large box, and this computer had a Motorola 68K chip in it. I think the hard drive was 80 megabytes hard drive, so it's a pretty in comparison to today's computers, it was pretty small. But that computer, I had Photoshop on there, I had Quark Express, I had I think is it Frame Maker, Macromedia, freehand, and a lot of these old designing applications. And that was my first actual getting into creating websites was on that computer actually.
Nice. It's amazing what with older hardware machines were capable of. Like I often think about how we were able to land men on the moon in 1969 with something with basically computational power of a pocket calculator. It's mad to think about, really.
Yeah, because you could run like so many applications on a small little hard drive, where today the same application requires like 20 or 40 gigabytes just to run. And yeah,
Yeah.
these Apple computers were used in desktop publishing initially for journalism and book publishing. And that's probably how I started using one, really. So yeah, I was originally a publisher.
Yeah, it's quite a common theme where people sort of pick up the programming stuff from their other career as well. So that's definitely something we should talk about later on as well. And what about in terms of where you've worked in your life? What's your favorite tech city of all time?
So I've only really worked in London, but I'd say Spitalfield area of London is probably the tech hub for developers. They call it the Silicon Roundabout in London. So yeah, I'll probably say around that area. It's been my good experiences working.
Yeah, same for me. I have a lot of fond memories of working around that area. I used to play football opposite Spitalfields Market on lunchtime leagues, and it could get very aggressive. A lot of pent up developers who'd had a bad morning,
Yeah,
I think, would be kicking at your ankles a little bit. Uh, what about when you're working? What powers that? Do you prefer listening to music or podcasts? And what style do you prefer? I think most people lean towards music. Would you say you're the same?
it depends, I guess. So some days I have like music in the background. I put Spotify on. Uh, I like to code to different sorts of music depending on the mood I'm in or whether I want to focus on some design work. So with design work, I generally listen to probably classical music in the
Mm.
background. I find it hard to listen to podcasts while I'm working or coding because I find it hard to separate my brain from trying to focus on a bit of code to focus on what someone's saying on the podcast. Yeah, I generally listen to like sort of background, sort of elevator music while I'm working, just background noise. Something just there, so I don't have to focus on it, but it just helps instead of having silence while you're working, especially if you're working from home.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I struggle to work in silence. Someone I worked with for a while actually told me he gave me this tip of listening to movie soundtracks when you code, and I started doing that, and it's pretty good. My favorite one is it's not actually a movie; it's a TV show, Mr. Robot, the one that Rami Malek was in about cybersecurity, and the soundtrack for that is really cool, especially considering the subject matter as well. So I like programming to that, but. Yeah, I agree with you about the podcast point. Like I was trying to do it this morning. It wasn't even something particularly like intensive. I was trying to listen to just a rugby news podcast this morning while trying to fix some end-to-end tests, and I couldn't even do that. So it's just yeah, I like my podcast as well, but yeah, I can't not really while I'm working. I find. And what about when you like to work? Would you say you're early bird, night owl, or something in between?
It depends. I generally get more done in the evening, but that's probably due to other aspects of my work life. So you have
Mm.
meetings during the day, you have catch ups with your team members, you might be discussing stuff with the product manager, um, where I generally do a lot of that in the daytime. Then later on in the afternoon, where it's a bit quieter, less noise in the office, then you can just focus on a bit of code. So I generally could work late in the evening on actual just coding.
Yeah, it's good to get a solid block, isn't it? Because I think sometimes when you get to a point where you're trying to squeeze in half an hour between meetings, it's quite difficult to code.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and I mean, we already touched a bit about your two careers really so far. But what about right in the sort of origin story? What job did you want when you were a child? What was your sort of dream role?
So when I was really young, I wanted to be a footballer. Then when I went to college, I actually studied media studies because that was like the in thing to do at the time. I actually wanted to
Hmm.
be make films. That's my original plan
Oh,
was to
nice,
make films and make music. So my first degree course I did was around yeah media technology, and I did a sort of one single in the studio, and I've done like a short film as well. So yeah, that was my early days. It was around film, music, and television.
nice. What kind of music was it?
It was this very cheesy pop track I did where we sampled Denise Williams' song. as a break. And yeah, myself and my colleague in my course, we just wrote some lyrics for it. And yeah, we'd never put it out, but it was quite fun to do it all in the studio.
I was going to say I was going to try and track it down on Spotify after this.
Yeah, but it's interesting back then.
Yeah. Was that so? When you say studio, were you going into like was that like a proper like music studios then, or?
Yeah, so we had proper studios at Thames Valley University, and even at college, we had like a proper TV suite studio as well. And you used to do all the editing back then on reel to reel. So it was just
Mm,
splicing tapes together.
okay.
Yeah, you had to find the point in the tape, you get a little knife, you splice it, you get your tape, stick it together, and that was how you used to do the editing.
That's really cool because I don't know if we ever talked about this, but I used to when I was sort of 17 to 20, used to make a bit of house music, and that was all just on the laptop really. And I always wondered about the splicing stuff back in the tape deck days because it made it seem like much more final, like if you're physically cutting the tape. But I definitely feel like the modern digital audio workstations make that stuff easier, but I feel like maybe the magic has gone a little bit like compared to the days when you'd be working with physical tapes and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's enjoyable, but you've made a mistake. It was costly at college. And from there we got to use like an actual digital studio, which was even more fun. You can just go crazy, experiment, and yeah, I did a lot of experimenting with music and TV and films back then. It was good times.
Nice. Sounds really cool. And then you started working in publishing. How did that come about?
So from my interest in film and TV, I just had an interest in publishing. I just thought, wouldn't it be great to do my own magazine? And I just loved magazines
Mm,
growing up. I used to go to W. Smith's on the weekend, grab a magazine, just admire the quality of the paper, the photography, the content. So yeah, I used to just like collect magazines, and from there I thought just do a course in publishing. So I dropped out of my media technology course and started a course in publishing at the London College of Printing and Publishing in South London. And yeah, and that was it. That was it. I was hooked on publishing. I wanted to be a publisher. I learned everything I could about making books and magazines. And then once I graduated, I started a job straight away for Macmillan Books in King's Cross. And yeah, that was it. I was making books in the production department.
did that kind of was there some experience there that led to you wanting getting into the actual software side of things, or was that more of an accident that you did outside of work? How did that transition happen?
So I worked in publishing for like 2 or 3 years. So I worked for like various publishing companies. Worked in editorial. And I worked in production. So editorial, where you deal with the authors, you take the manuscripts, you take any photography coming in. And production is mainly you take the book from the initial stages until it's like actually on the bookshelf. So I've done that for like several years, but I always had a dream of doing my own magazine. And so one day I just decided to leave the company I was working for and just go it alone and just make my own magazine.
Wow, nice. That's a pretty bold step. And did that what was the magazine physical and online, or was it just physical at that time?
So this was, I think, back in 2002, 2003. So it was a physical magazine called Juicy, Juicy. It was like a art, street culture, music, fashion magazine. So basically, it was a magazine about all the things I loved back then. Um, and yeah, I just left my job. I had some money saved up. I got a grant from the Princess Trust as well, and then I thought, okay, I'm just gonna do this magazine, get it out on the shelves, and just see how it goes. And so it was a very small outfit. I didn't have an office. More or less work from home to use that as my my office had my Apple Quadra still, which was good. So I bought a new machine, a G4 Apple as well, and I had this massive Epson printer, and this was like a proper like proofer. It was an Epson Pro 5000, and it's like 2 grand or 3 grand back then for this massive. Like took up half of my room was this printer. So I used that to work on my color proofs. I had Adobe InDesign to put together all the pages of the magazine. So I've done the photography. I interviewed people for this, put the magazine together, and then I thought, okay, I needed a website for this. I didn't have any experience of doing websites. I had software on my computer, and I just thought, okay, I need to get this done. I don't have a budget to pay someone to do a website for the magazine. I'm going to just try and do it myself. So I just start learning and teach myself how to put a website together. And from doing the website for the magazine is how I started my journey into web development.
Nice. It's really cool. It's interesting speaking to people about this because a lot of the time people learn web development as some kind of necessity to go for something else. So it's one of those skills that I always say to people on when they ask me about getting into tech is that you don't necessarily need to be a software engineer. It's just generally such a useful skill set to have, even if it's not something you're using for your day job. So what did you build the web services in?
So back then, I had there was a Adobe, I think it's Adobe Go Live. I'm not sure if you'll probably remember that, and you had Macromedia Dreamweaver.
Oh, I've heard of Dreamweaver. I haven't used it, but I've heard of it. I think it's still running, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's still around. So these were like the first early sort of packages you had, which allowed you to create a website. Most websites back then were done using tables. So tables were the big thing back in the early
Mm.
2000s. Tables and image maps and the hotspots on your page to link things together. You had very basic animation. You had things like mood tools and Scriptalicious and little JavaScript libraries available to add some sort of some interactivity to your website. It's very basic stuff, and you had like CMS called Joomla and Mambo. I'm not sure if any of your listeners will recall those early PHP CMSs, and that's when I started dealing with or dabbling with using a CMS as well before I got into starting using WordPress later on in my career. It was like Joomla was like the thing everyone used back then. You had a template. It was like a table template, and it was done using PHP. So you set up a lamp stack, and you had like an admin side to it, so you can log in and create content.
I could see why that would be so useful if you're publishing content and that kind of thing. So that's really cool. And how would you say? I guess we're talking sort of like early to mid noughties here. How, in sort of the past 15 to 20 years, how would you say the software industry has evolved during that time? Are there anything you miss from back in those days, or anything you think has really improved? Like anything you really don't miss?
Well, tables probably. So back then you used a lot of tables and frames in your website, which I don't miss. It was very difficult creating a table template. So you imagine like you'd first create your design in Photoshop, and then you probably split all that design up into table cells. So imagine you're taking an image and you're breaking it into little cells to piece it together again in a website.
Hmm.
It was
Yeah, I could imagine that being quite challenging to deal with.
it was very challenging way to develop because it meant things can be misaligned quite easily. I don't miss that. CMSs, I don't actually miss the CMS world. It was great when you're starting out because it allowed you to get up and running quite quickly. So you had a whole stack, you had a back end and front end. but you end up, once you start using a CMS, you can easily end up just going down this tunnel of just being a CMS person, or being like a
Mm.
WordPress person or a Joomla person or Drupal person. So I did dabble in a lot of CMSs back then. Use Drupal, use WordPress, Joomla, and yeah, you just end up that's all you know really. So I think it's good to diversify and learn different aspects of development, not rely too much on a CMS or a framework.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was going to ask you about that. Do you, how do you think is the best way to kind of roll with the punches and learn new things? Because obviously we know, particularly the front end evolves really rapidly.
Yeah, the front end, I've seen so many changes in the last 10, 15 years where it used to be quite simple. You'd have an index HTML file, maybe a JavaScript file which used jQuery, and that would have been it. You'd have a website which was quite functional, quite interactive for your users still. You can even have an admin page just using jQuery and a database somewhere. And I think it's kind of got more complicated, I think, with the tooling, where you're going from just needing to know like one or two things or three things to needing to know 10 to 20 things. I've seen tooling grow where you've had Grunt, then you had Gulp, then you had Broccoli, then you have Webpack, and you have so many just tools available to try and make our jobs a lot easier, but in the end, they make our jobs kind of more complicated because now you're not only just managing building an application, you're managing all these different tools and dependencies which come from using them as well. Um, so yeah, trying to keep up to date with all this is a challenge, I think. Um, I don't think it's even possible to keep up to date with everything in the front end. There's always something new being developed by someone to replace something which was working a year ago, or all of a sudden that's no longer good. We need to be using this latest and greatest new tool,
Yeah.
and you have to learn this. Otherwise, you're going to be fear of missing out in the front end development when you have your catch ups with your friends and they're talking about this. Have you heard of broccoli? And you think, oh well, I haven't used that yet. You need to. You feel like you're not keeping up with it. I don't think you should have to try and keep up with it necessarily. Keep up with your own development and your own learning, of course. But you can do that just by keeping up to date with. If you're interested in JavaScript, you can just try and learn what's new in JavaScript, what's coming out in the new version of ECMAScript 2017 or 2018 and so on, and just keep up with those changes and not worry too much about the tooling or framework changes because there's so many out there. And it depends on the job as well. So you might choose a different tool for a job. So I would say don't try and just be stuck on one tool or framework. Just try and learn the languages, learn the dynamics of the language, and that should be enough.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as long as your fundamentals are solid as well, it's really easy to sort of learn new things. And if you get in the habit of continuously trying to learn new things and go over basics and new things, it's a good way to go. But I totally agree about hopping on trends. It's very easy to, like, I've seen people that are like, oh, I know Angular, but I've got to know React now, and then suddenly Vue.js explodes, so they've got to learn Vue.js, and now the hype's all on Svelte and all this stuff, and it's easy to drive yourself mad by just going and chasing after the new trends in front end. It's such a rapidly evolving area. I did mean to ask, what is broccoli other than the vegetable? Because I've never heard of
It's
that.
just another tooling similar to like Gulp, just another tooling for just like how Webpack and everything works as well. Yeah, it's Broccoli JS. Yeah. So Grunt was like the original one, which I started using
Mm.
back in probably 2005 and six. So they're basically just task runners, really. I'm not sure if you probably didn't touch on using Gulp when you worked with us at M2A Media. So it's just a script file where you can create tasks to run. So when it runs this Gulp file, it'll go through these lists of tasks or functions, and it will just run those tasks in that file for you. So it could be one of them could be just open this CSS file and do a string replace on in that file, or one could be to minify your CSS file, or one could be run uglify on your JavaScript files, and so on.
So kind of like how Webpack works now,
Yeah.
then.
So now most of that's done
Yeah.
by Webpack. So Webpack does that, all of that for you under the hood. You don't really have to see the internals of Webpack. So even Angular will use Webpack, so using Webpack to run some of those bits for us, but we don't have to see what Angular's doing with Webpack. We know it's there. We just run our npm run start or ng serve, and everything just works for us magically. But you can tap into it.
I was going to say that, yeah, that's always what you want, isn't it? As long as you can, if you can just run that quick command and it just works, it's a good feeling. But so do you just? I mean, we're getting a little bit in depth technical here, but do you just edit that in like the package JSON then if you want to make the changes, or?
So if you want to do an Angular, you can actually just you can add your own sort of Webpack config file into your application, and you can add any sort of custom sort of Webpack bits you want to have in there. But Webpack has quite a lot of plugins available for it, like Post CSS is one of them, which I guess Angular would use. So it has an array of options with Webpack, and it runs the development server in Angular as well. That uses the
Mhm.
Webpack development server.
Nice, cool. And I guess this is kind of a related question because it's to do with keeping up with the new technologies as well, I'm sure. But how did you get to the point where you are now, where you're both a senior developer and sort of leading teams? How would you say what strategies did you use to grow your career to the point where you were comfortable enough to take on that kind of role and to manage people? What big takeaways have you got from that?
Yeah, so I started back at the University of Arts. I was a web development manager there. I started there as a junior developer at the university, where I worked alongside Chris Toppen, who currently works for me at M2A Media. So yeah, after a while, I try to learn as much as I can from him in terms of web development, but then management is slightly different. I think I've always found being a developer and manager, you have to try and juggle two hats really. Because as a developer, you just want to code. You want to just put your head down, put your headphones on, and code, and not really focus on anything else. But with your management hat, you actually have to manage other developers, not only them working, but any other sort of issues might arise from them as employees as well. So yeah, it's not everyone wants to do that as a career path. I know developers who just only enjoy development and don't want to really get into the management aspect of it all. But I always enjoyed managing as well, working with people in the team.
So I guess it's kind of finding the balance is one of the biggest skills there is. Then in that case, if you're both staying as a contributor in terms of writing a code, but also managing as well, I guess finding that balance must be tricky.
It is tricky in terms of time management as well. Because when I first started at M2A Media, as I told you when you used to work with us, it was just I was the sole front end developer.
Mm.
Um, so you end up having quite a few different hats when you're like the sole person at a company. Because not only was I doing the UX and the design work, dealing with stakeholders, going to meetings, you still have to deliver some work at the end of the week or 2 week sprints as well. So you have to try and manage your time. So okay, I need to still have to deliver this, but I also need to understand the requirements. I also need to like try and express those requirements and designs to the stakeholders. I need to gather some feedback. I need to actually code this as well. I need to work with some testers, make sure this is tested and meets the acceptance criteria. And then when you're managing someone else now on your team, you not only have to worry about the bits of work I have to do to make sure it's clear to what they have to do as well. And they're happy in their job and they know and understand what they need to deliver. And then you more people you manage, and it increases.
Yeah. And would you say there's any, I mean, I'm sure there's not some kind of like secret recipe for it, but have you found any techniques that are helpful for that time management that you think people could use?
So I used to use the Pomodoro technique.
Mm.
I tend to try use it, and I just forget to put the time on sometimes. I try to time block how much time you're working on a task. I find it's easy as a developer to not get carried away, but you can get caught up in a moment when you're trying to solve a problem in code, and you just don't want to move away from your screen until you solve this problem. It's like a hunger. I need to get this. I need to solve this. I need to solve this. And so, what you thought would have been like an hour or 2 hour sort of task, can end up like you end up spending like days because you don't know when to quit or just time box it and say, okay, what I need to do is spend, or say, 4 hours trying to solve this problem. If I can't solve this problem, you need to just move on and pick up something else and provide feedback to why you can't carry on with this for now. And if your product manager or scrum master says, okay, we're going to give you some more time, that's fine. But yeah, otherwise you can spend like weeks and weeks in this like box, just staring at the screen and not thinking about anything else. And you're spending all of your time on this one thing where you could have been doing other things or needed to do other things at the same time. So try and time box things if you can. Try and use your calendar. So what I tend to do as well in my Google Calendar, I'll put like a block of time. So if I'm working on a ticket, I'll put on my calendar an hour to 2 hours looking at this ticket in the morning. In the afternoon, I might put another block on my calendar and focus on some UX. So your day is structured and you know what you want to focus on for the day. And yeah, and try and be just really rigid with that as well. So if that 2 hours up and that's the time you're giving yourself, you move on to what other thing or item you want to focus on for the day.
Yeah, that sounds really good. I remember we used to do that at M2A a lot, and it's a good way to also create a bit of urgency as well. Sometimes as well, if you want to solve a problem, it kind of if you're a little bit competitive, I find myself I'm quite competitive, and it was quite a good way of almost like a challenge. Can I finish this in this time? But yeah, it's very easy as well because naturally the kind of people we are as developers. Generally developers like to if they find a string they want to keep pulling on it and don't want to leave the screen, and it's kind of good to have the discipline to assign assign a deadline to it. I definitely agree. And I tried the Pomodoro, I think the technique as well through I have that app on my phone, Forest, where you plant a tree and basically don't touch your phone or like your web browser for 30 minutes or whatever, and the tree gets planted. But I'm the same. I just always forget to actually just turn it on. So it's one of those ones where I was finding myself setting alarms, which is just a bit ridiculous. So more or less given up on that. So I've got a whole sort of forest of withered trees on there. It's a good app though. If you remember to use it, it's a good app because there's something really weirdly satisfying about the end of the week seeing a load of trees, and I could have it for different stuff. So like if it's like for like day job work, then I can plant a certain type of tree. If I'm editing the podcast or marketing the podcast, it can be a certain type of tree. Or if I'm learning, like I'm doing a course at the moment on the more advanced React concepts, if I'm spending time doing that, then I can I can plant that tree. Link for the course in the description, by the way, because they actually very kindly offered to sponsor the podcast. So that's quite exciting times. So you can actually get 10% off with code friends10. I totally forgot about that until just now. That is a really good course. I've been enjoying doing it as part of the Zero to Mastery Academy. But yeah, it's one of those ones where I definitely find as well the time box is a good way of going about it. And we've talked obviously about how we both got into tech, and the landscape shifts pretty rapidly. In 2021, the example I like to use when I ask people this is maybe like a relative comes to ask you about this, like maybe someone that's just left school and trying to decide what to do. If someone said to you and said, "Hey Howard, I want to be a software engineer, but I'm not sure the best way of going about it in current year," how would you advise them? What do you think they should do?
Well, I'd advise them to try and talk to someone who works in that industry. So I was doing some mentoring with a company called Black Valley last year. So Black Valley tried to help more people from BME minority groups and stuff get more involved in tech. And not everyone knows what they want to do when you're at school. As I said, I wasn't sure what I really wanted to do, and I had many different careers to since leaving school. But yeah, talk to someone, and if it's something for you and you're interested in doing, maybe first step is try and get a mentor. Try and decide whether you actually need to go down the academic path, or can you actually go down the professional path? Can you do apprenticeship in it? There's various ways of getting into tech. I've worked with people who don't have degrees. At M2A Media, there's people who have degrees, and there's actually developers who really good developers don't have them. They straight after school done an apprenticeship, and yeah, they're up there working as a senior developer. So you don't necessarily need to do that academic path if you don't want to. It's not part of your journey. You can just start working straight away. You might have experience of coding from a young age, because a lot of youngsters nowadays we start coding from junior school.
Yeah, definitely. There's more exposure to it now, from what I can see, which is always good. And I totally agree with what you say. Like, there's definitely no one defined path to do it, and there's a lot of routes nowadays. I think a lot of apprenticeships actually you can work towards getting a like bachelor's degree at the same time, so you get kind of the best of both worlds. You mentioned finding a mentor as well. How would you suggest that someone goes about finding a mentor? Would you say like just asking friends and family, or maybe LinkedIn or something?
Yeah, ask LinkedIn friends or family as well. I've been asked by like family friends if I can give them some advice into getting into tech, and so I just whenever they need advice, I jump on a call with them, offer my experiences, point them in some direction of some useful tutorials, and also in your workplace as well. So there's where I currently work, I've been doing some mentoring with someone who wanted to get into front end development, and I've spent some time with them each week and going through some tutorials, going through some code with them, giving some challenges. So yeah, just they can find in different places a mentor. Um,
Yeah, and definitely don't be afraid to ask if you're listening to this podcast now and you're a bit worried about just putting yourself out there and asking. Like, it's an industry where people tend to be quite friendly, in my experience, and people are often glad to help. And if you're an experienced developer listening as well, then if you haven't mentored someone already, definitely try and do it, because it's very much a two-way thing. You end up learning a lot from the mentee a lot of the time, particularly about the newer stuff, because they're the ones learning the very newer stuff, and it's a really good way to um, further develop your understanding of the fundamentals. So yeah, absolutely. If you're looking for a mentor, don't be afraid to message someone. In fact, a previous guest on this podcast, who was on a couple of weeks ago, Ethan, when I was still a recruiter, so really back in a few years ago now, Ethan actually emailed me asking for advice. And it was such a professional email that I thought he was like a university graduate, and it turned out he was 16. and we stayed in touch. And he's been really proactive about messaging people and asking for opportunities. And he's like 19, 20 now, and working as a DevOps engineer at Mastercard. And he kept saying on the podcast that it's very much like, just don't be afraid to ask and network, because it's the most powerful thing you can do as a aspiring techie, is definitely networking. And I mean, my kind of next question on that, Howard, would be, looking back on your career, is there anything maybe that you would change looking back, or a different approach you would take to like learning or climbing the ladder, or would you say that you feel that your approach was best?
Well, if I can speak to my younger self, I guess uh, I don't think we really had the courses or the online sort of learning websites like Udacity, Coursera, Code Academy, which you have now. Back when I started, um, you probably had to grab yourself a book, quite a weighty book, and you'd probably have to spend a lot of time going through the book, following tutorials, and that was the only way you could really pick things up. It wasn't as easy as it is. I think nowadays. I think nowadays there's a lot more opportunity for people to actually pick up a new skill, whether it's front end, back end, or using JavaScript or using Python. There's so many wonderful courses out there. There's a lot more opportunity for people to learn and get certified online than there was back 20 years ago. Um, so yeah, if I was young now, I'll be probably doing an online course, or one of those online degrees, just so yeah. Because I think when you tend to like learn yourself, you do miss out on some of those like areas which the formal areas of learning, like software development, you miss out on some of those. Where if you do like a course, they're going to take you through a lot of the foundations and the basic stuff. I think Free Code Camp is great as well for you who haven't used it before. There's some great tutorials on there, and so I still go back to this day and do tutorials online. I'm always trying to like learn and pick up something new. I've done a front end sort of degree on Udacity as well, which is really good. And then I'll start doing a UX course done by Google on Coursera. So yeah, keep on learning. You never, it's never too late. You're never too old. So yeah, I'm one of those people.
Nice. UX is definitely one of those things for a software engineer people don't consider as much. And I've actually, funnily enough, had sort of someone I know from my sort of like personal life asked me about UX careers recently, and I actually wasn't 100% sure what to say in terms of like the best courses. So would you say that one from Udacity is one of the best if you want to get a taste of UX?
I think there's a Google one on Coursera which is really good. It's like a professional
Hmm.
certificate in UX design. I can send you the link so you can post that for any of your listeners who are interested in finding about UX. It's really good in-depth course. UX is quite a big subject area as well. It covers just research, it covers design aspects of it as well. So yes, it's really good.
Nice. Yeah, definitely not one to be to be forgotten about. Good UX. Like I've been redesigning the. I soft launched the Coder Career website the other day, and I loaded it up. And I don't know if you've ever had this sinking feeling when you load up the website and you just realize you hate it. I really hate the landing page, and I've been trying to draft using Figma. I've been trying to draft a new landing page, but I forget how much goes into UX. It's tough. So that's definitely a thing as well. If you're trying to decide what kind of tech to go into and you're not sure that working with code all day is for you, UX is a great career as well. And there's a lot of good opportunities on that side of things as well. If you like tech, but you're not sure you want to code all day, it's a good way to go for sure.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed, even though I started as a coder, I always enjoyed the working with users and understanding users' needs and making sure when I do build something, it is focused on the user. And so I think I'd say to any sort of front end developer out there is learn a bit about UX. It will help you in what you're building.
It's my personal highest priority to learn at the moment is good UX, because yeah, I've definitely identified it as a weak point, because when you've because I in my career I've always worked with someone who's done a lot of design. Like when I was at M2A, obviously you did a lot of the designs, some great designs. That then I would code up into a component. And at my current role at Purple Bricks, I work with great UI UX designers as well who do the same thing. So it's one of those ones, you forget how much work goes into it until you have to do it yourself. So it's a tricky one, but definitely worth learning and understanding, particularly if you want to be an entrepreneur or something like that in the future. But yeah, I appreciate I've taken up probably most of your lunchtime here, Howard. So I really appreciate you coming on to speak with me. Do you have anything that you're working on that you want to shout out at the moment, or anything like that?
Yeah, I'd like to say we are hiring at M2A Media. So any front end developers out there, get in touch. We'll post my details with the podcast. Send me an email, and yeah, we're looking for some front end developers.
Cool, good stuff. And I can certify as well that Howard is a great boss and M2A is a great company to work for. Are you doing remote employees at the moment, or is it only for people in London?
We are doing remote. I need to confirm that on there. We are doing remote in the UK, definitely. But we have quite a few different roles as well. So there are some back end roles for any back end listeners out there as well.
Cool. I'll make sure the links to that is in the description as well. But yeah, I don't know if we actually mentioned what M2A does. It's a very cool industry. It's broadcast technology. So if you fancy working for some really like blue chip clients and working on delivering the world's favorite content, then it's a great company and a great opportunity.
Yep. So yeah, we do video streaming. So if there's any like video streaming engineers or people interested in video streaming, um, yes, let me know. Get in contact.
Cool. Good stuff. Well, thanks again for coming on, Howard. I really appreciate it. And thank you as well to all the listeners out there. You can find all the links to everything we discussed, and as well our sponsor, Zero to Mastery, a link to their courses in the description. But thanks again for listening, and have a great week.
Thanks for having me, Cam. Take care.